the most popular word which was thrown around, especially last year, ahead of the Lok Sabha elections, was the word that was Razakar.
So the Razakars, they were the militant wing, but the parent organization, the MIM, it was formed in the 1920s by Maulana Mahmud Nawaz Khan as a socio-cultural organization initially. One of the major figures that was instrumental in this new identity of the Arya Samaj was Pandit Narendra Ji. So the tug of war between these two organizations is what really contributed to the communal fault lines between Hindus and Muslims as we approached accession.
What can you tell us about how the Razakars worked in cahoots? Because that's the one thing you mentioned in your book.
To uphold this very aristocratic, feudal setup, especially within the districts, the Muslim ruling elite, they needed to co-opt this Hindu gentry because ultimately within the districts, it was a Hindu majority. So despite the Razakars being Muslim, they helped Hindu Jagirdars uphold their supremacy. And if it meant using force, whether it's sexual assault, extreme violence, so be it.
I was reading the book at the same time when, in real time in Hyderabad, the Karachi bakery was being attacked as the military conflict between India and Pakistan escalated.
Pakistan was a country in which there was a lot of opportunity. A new country always brings in opportunities.
It was more just like we'll roll the dice and see what happens.
Not just even roll the dice, because a new country brings in new opportunities for people to spearhead the professional landscape, the bureaucratic landscape. So a lot of Hyderabadis, they knew that the opportunity lay in Pakistan. State Bank of Pakistan has at one time had plenty of Hyderabadi employees.
Hello, this is Anjana Meenakshi for the News Minute. We have been discussing politics a lot in the last couple of weeks, and understandably so. But this time we thought we'll take a break and try and understand the cultural context of the city I live in, which is Hyderabad. And a lot of words have been thrown around in the last couple of years. The Razakars, Mulki, non-Mulki, Telangana identity, the statehood identity. And all these words carry a very heavy meaning. It has a long history attached to it. But what do we know about the Hyderabad, the city of Hyderabad, pardon me, or even better, what do we know about its residents, the Hyderabadis? Not a whole lot because the history is complex, but to try and understand exactly that, we are with Daneesh Majid. He's the writer of the book, The Hyderabadis from 1947 to the present, and we'll just hopefully try and understand a strain of what Hyderabad history constitutes in this brief interview. So Daneesh, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi Anjana, thanks for having me.
Welcome. All right. So we'll get right to it. The most popular word which was thrown around, especially last year, ahead of the Lok Sabha elections, was the word that was Razakar. Now, what we know of Razakars is that they were a paramilitary force, a pro-Nizam force, and that they did not want the princely state of Hyderabad to be merged with the Union of India, which is when Operation Polo happened and the Indian military came in, and then eventually Hyderabad did become a part of the Union of India. So, one thing you write about in your book is that there was a tug and pull between the Razakars on one hand and the Arya Samaj, which was against the Nizam of Hyderabad on the other. So this is interesting, right? Because these are two opposites which we haven't really had to think about. So if we were to think about it, what can you tell us about these two very different strands of thought and how they have panned out?
So the Razakar was the militia wing of the Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin.
What we know as the MIM.
Yes.
The same party.
Yes, very much. Today, it's known as the All India Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin.
Okay. There's been a change of tune, yeah.
Absolutely, because after 1948, there was definitely a crackdown on the MIM and specifically its militant wing, the Razakars. However, after Qasim Rizvi left for Pakistan, he bequeathed the organization to Abdul Wahid Owaisi, who was the father of Salar-e-Millat, Sultan Salahuddin Owaisi. And Salahuddin Owaisi Saab is the father of the current head of the MIM, Asaduddin Owaisi. So the Razakars, they were the militant wing, But the parent organization, the MIM, it was formed in the 1920s by Maulana Mahmud Nawaz Khan as a socio-cultural organization initially. But before that came the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj were formed in Hyderabad state in the late 1800s. Later, it came to the city because at first it was in the Marathwada region of Nizam ruled Hyderabad. When it came to the city, it definitely resonated among the Kayasts specifically. I mean, there were other communities as well that definitely had been under their orbit as well. But the on the ground activities, the grassroots activities that the Arya Samaj did, a lot of it was related to lessening the rigidity of the hierarchies of subcaste within Kayasts. For instance, one of the Kayasts who was associated closely with the Samaj was Gaya Parshad. Gaya Parshad did his part in ensuring that these hierarchies of subcaste would be lessened. But
that doesn't sound like a bad thing necessarily.
No, absolutely not. Even the Arya Samaj, the parent organization, by parent I mean in Punjab, because that's where it really came into its own, the Arya Samaj. It was at first a reform organization. It was against caste hierarchies there as well. And to the dismay of some people, against idol worship too. It took on a political color, as we know. And things were no different with Hyderabad. After the grassroots activity, it really, really took on a political color. One of the major figures that was instrumental in this new identity of the Arya Samaj was Pandit Narendra Ji. His speeches were very incendiary, to say the least. On the other hand, there's also Bahadur Yar Jung. His speeches are at the same time from the MIM, yes.
Okay.
Bahadur Yar Jung of the MIM, he too was a great speaker, and many people remember him as such. However, his speeches weren't exactly any less, incendiary as well too. So the tug of war between these two organizations is what really contributed to the communal fault lines between Hindus and Muslims as we approached accession.
I see. Okay. So this is interesting because I think the chronicling of Arya Samaj, especially in Hyderabad, I don't think there has been a sufficient bit of chronicling. But if we were to go down that road and continue to speak about the Razakars, right? Like we still see Razakar thrown around as an insult, even now. And the Owaisis bear the brunt of it. One, because of the party they belong to, but also because they are the most prominent Muslim leaders in the country. But what can you tell us about how the Razakars worked in cahoots? Because that's the one thing you mentioned in your book, that they worked in cahoots with the landed Hindu gentry. It wasn't completely just a contempt and disregard for Hindus and this love and affection for Muslims in toto. There were political affiliations which were forged, right? So what can you tell us about that and how Razakars were hand in glove with the Hindu gentry?
The Hindu gentry, which you aptly mentioned, they were the co-opted class and caste within this feudal hierarchy that was very much prevalent throughout the princely state of Hyderabad. And these hierarchies were also in other princely states as well too, such as Kashmir. But coming back to Hyderabad, to uphold this very aristocratic feudal setup, especially within the districts, the Muslim ruling elite, they needed to co-opt this Hindu gentry because ultimately within the districts, it was a Hindu majority. And if you have the landed castes doing not just doing your bidding, but also ruling over what were essentially their own fiefdoms, then it's easy to keep that Hindu majority population within the district under your thumb to ensure that their labor keeps the cycle of tributes in the form of grain, nazar, whatever one wants to call it, to the feudal elite of the state and ultimately to the Nizam. Because as generous as the Nizam was as a person, and he might have been very foresighted, he ultimately presided over this system, and there's no denying that. And the Hindus' role in this was very much documented by people like Inukonda Tirumali in his book. He perfectly shows in that book, which came in very handy for that for research for my own book. He shows that even though the people oppressed were being Hindus, there the feudal layer of oppression in the districts, the first layer was of Hindus. And who did those Hindus use to uphold that oppression? Especially as a lot of these peasants were in the midst of an uprising against the setup that really kept them under their thumb. So, despite Razakars being Muslim, they helped Hindu Jagirdars uphold their supremacy. And if it meant using force, whether it's sexual assault, extreme violence, so be it.
Well, that's horrifying, but where did the communal clashes between Hindus and Muslims break out? This is one thing you mentioned in a chapter on a senior Hyderabad journalist, Mr. Ayub Ali Khan. But I wanted to try and understand what caused, like, for instance, Muslims to be attacked under the suspicion of being members of the Razakar unit. Like, how did that at all pan out? Like, how did the communalism spread and how did the narrative spread from there?
So the communalism that you're talking about, it was ultimately a massacre of a lot of Muslims within Hyderabad, Karnataka, in which cities like Bidar and Gulbarga come today. But those are part of Karnataka state, and what is presently known as Marathwada in the present day state of Maharashtra. But a lot of the communal fault lines, the Razakars had a role to play in that, because with the freedom movement also playing out all over India, it clearly reverberated down here in Hyderabad as well too. And there was also the other strand of the anti-Nizam struggle, which was the leftist, the Telangana Peasants' Rebellion. The first strand being the Congress, because it was ultimately the Hyderabad State Congress under the direction of the Indian National Congress that also began a freedom struggle, a satyagraha against the Nizam as well. And besides Hyderabad, Karnataka, and Marathwada, certain districts within Telangana, outside the ones that were also being engulfed by the leftist struggle, certain districts in which there were towns like Kohir, Zahirabad, they were contagious to the Kannada-speaking districts of Hyderabad. When with all the massacres that were going down there, that blowback surfaced up in places like Kohir and Zahirabad. And one of my subjects, who's also my old boss at siyasat.com, his family was a part of a Mansabdar family. Mansabdars were also were another class of landowners within this feudal setup of Asaf Jahi Hyderabad. So a lot of rioters, they were also running free in the Kohir and Zahirabad, in these parts of Telangana. And his family also bared the brunt of it too, in that their house was burned down, that too by their own servants. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I now want to reference one of the other strands of history you try and touch upon in your book, which is to look at the Telangana Peasanthood Rebellion, right? So I'll just read out from one thing you wrote, that you write about Mr. Chukka Ramaya, who's a well-known leader of the left, an educator, and you speak about how when you met him, and I was there to learn from him about a strand of Hyderabad history that is often buried within the narratives of police action, the Telangana Peasant Rebellion. The Telangana Rebellion was never communal in character, Chukka Ramaya asserted. It was a collective fight against the exploitative local landlords called Doras, among whom were many Hindus. Okay, so there are two things here which I want to ask you. One is, why did you say that buried among the very many narratives of police action? Why was the Telangana Peasanthood Rebellion something which gets diluted or not given as much central focus by mainstream academics or historians? And secondly, what makes the peasanthood movement as homogeneous as heterogeneous as it is, right? So that is something which I would like you to tell us about.
I think the reason that this leftist strand of the anti-Nizam struggle doesn't have much prominence is that because at first, the leftists and the Congress folks, they actually worked together. There was a certain amount of synergy between them against the Nizam. However, in 1948, once the accession happened, which is referred to as police action by many people, once that happened, the Indian state was set on clamping down upon the rebellion that was going on in the districts. And likewise, the leftist guerrillas in the districts, they now had a new enemy, which was the Indian state. With the Nizam ousted, with a lot of the feudal landed castes also ousted in the 1948 to the 51, it was time for another battle that raged on. And there were two strands even within this leftist struggle as casualties started to mount up. For instance, one strand, which some people conflate as the Andhra strand, whose face was Puchalapalli Sundaraya along with others. They wanted the armed struggle to keep going. But there's also another strand of people such as Ajoy Ghosh and many other names, such as Raj Bahadur Gaur, who was mentioned in this chapter. They eventually warmed up to the idea of carrying out the cause within the ambit of the Indian Constitution. So I believe that's exactly why, one of the reasons why this the Telangana communist struggle is buried within the annals of history.
All right. Okay, that's fair. So I think the most interesting chapter for me, which I was surprised to learn about, was a chapter you have on double migration, which you speak about, and primarily because I was reading the book at the same time when, in real time in Hyderabad, the Karachi bakery was being attacked as the military conflict between India and Pakistan escalated. And this is not the first time this has happened to Karachi bakery because of the name Karachi in it. People often assume that they're born out of Pakistan, and each time the owners of the bakery have to come and clarify that it's part of our history, it's not part of our identity. They're very much an Indian brand. But you do write a lot about how a lot of Hyderabadi Muslims, a lot of Hyderabadis migrated to Pakistan at that point of time for various reasons. There were socio-political reasons, there were economic reasons for them to do so. But how does the identity then pan out? Like, how do they end up identifying themselves, and how does this end up affecting Hyderabad, and how does it influence identities at large itself?
So even after 1948, there was an exodus of Muslims to Pakistan as well. Usually what we end up hearing in a lot of narratives is Punjab, Bengal, North India, Sindh.
Correct. We're far more removed, right? Geographically speaking.
Very much so, very much so. But even out of Hyderabad, many Muslims, not just ones who had fallen out of favor with the Indian government because of the anti-accession and problematic rhetoric they were propagating, but these are also apolitical people who just didn't know what the future held in store for them, with a non-Muslim establishment now ruling over them. They had to get used to being a numerical minority in a democratic setup, because previously these people were the ruling minority in a princely setup where the majority population was Hindus. So a lot of these people, they didn't know what the future held for them. Some of them were one of them was even my grandfather. And you mentioned, I think when we had a conversation before, you'd mentioned one of my subjects. His father, he was a very qualified professional.
This is Ali Adil Khan.
Yeah, Ali Adil Khan, yeah. He was a qualified professional. He had done his studies at Aligarh Muslim University. But He just didn't know what would be their fate in terms of the socioeconomic setup, or their socioeconomic status, a new status which they had to get used to. So Pakistan was a country in which there is a lot of opportunity. A new country always brings in opportunities.
It was more just like we'll roll the dice and see what happens.
Not just even roll the dice, because a new country brings in new opportunities for people to spearhead the professional landscape, the bureaucratic landscape. So a lot of Hyderabadis, they knew that the opportunity that lay in Pakistan. State Bank of Pakistan has at one time had plenty of Hyderabadi employees. So a lot of these people, they went to Hyderabad. My grandfather almost went, but he stood because no, to Pakistan.
All right.
My grandfather almost went to Pakistan, but that's an interesting story which you'll read in the book as to why he didn't end up going. But when a lot of these Hyderabadis, they went, because with the capital also being Karachi there, a lot of and Karachi was a major outpost for a lot of North Indian and Hyderabadi migrants. So being close to the center of power, opportunity came to them. But when the capital moved up to Islamabad, that's when they kind of understood that that the ruling and establishment of Pakistan was going to be a more Punjabi and Pashtun centric one. That's where opportunities kind of started, weren't as much in abundance for them.
Okay, so that is kind of how it worked. How many of them? There were also quite a few instances where they did go and they decided to come back, right? Like quite a few instances where the migration did not, like the identities were so fluid at that point of time that they did migrate to Pakistan, but quite a few of them also returned to Hyderabad.
Many of them in 1948. My grandfather, he even went there, and he narrowed down on a piece of land to buy, and he thought the migration was pretty much a done deal. But when he came back, a lot of his family members, including his wife, said, "No, we'll stay here." However, a lot of these people, they didn't migrate back to Hyderabad necessarily. Maybe some of them did before 65, when it was easier to travel between the two countries. But especially when, the establishment started becoming a little more quote unquote Muhajir centric. And Muhajir is what the terminology that's used to describe a lot of the North Indian and even Hyderabadi migrants that went to Pakistan after partition, or even after, the 60s. So when they found out that Pakistan, to varying extents and for various reasons, was not what they imagined it to be, part of the reasons being their sidelining by the Punjabi Pashtun establishment, a lot of them went to the United States, UK, and Canada, especially when that anti-MQM violence broke out. And the MQM, what I mean by MQM is the Muhajir Qawmi Movement Party, which claimed to be the representatives of these Muhajirs who are being sidelined. And they became a powerful force, but there was also a crackdown upon them, and the violence that emanated as a result of that, it just made it very unbearable for a lot of, Hyderabadi Pakistanis, Lucknowi Pakistanis, Delhi wale Pakistanis to just stay there. So that also contributed to this exodus of a professional class, a middle class from Pakistan to the West.
Okay. Now, this is what happened in Pakistan's political landscape, but in the lead up to the Indian independence and the formation of the Republic of India, one thing which your book touches upon, which I think is very interesting because it also speaks about how student politics at that point of time was of an entirely different beast from what we know student politics to be today. There was a lot more of a much heavier influence of poetry, of journalistic writing, which interspersed with the student movement very heavily. So could you talk a little more about what happened to Osmania University back in those days? Now, Osmania University's protests aren't, I think the last we saw a really huge, massive Osmania University protest was during the Telangana movement, right? Like recent, before the state was formed. But what could you tell us about Osmania University of the 1940s and the 1930s?
Oh, that was an exciting place to be. the OU of the 1930s. Because a lot of these students, whether they were Hindu or Muslim, they were very much being uh, influenced by the political trends that were just emerging, not just in India, but in Europe as well. At first, the Congress struggle really, really influenced a lot of these kids, such as Raj Bahadur Gaur, Srinivas Lahoti. However, once the Satyagraha was called off by Gandhi as well, within Hyderabad as well, that left him very disillusioned. But at the same time, even as that Congress strand was very much making its presence felt, the leftist strand, due to the communist struggle that happened in Russia,
The Bolshevik.
the Bolshevik revolution, a lot of these kids that went to Osmania, they were pretty well read, and it was the country's first vernacular institution as well. So literature from Europe about this struggle where a cruel czar was overthrown and the peasants just rose up, and just a lot of literature written by Beatrice and Webb, Marx. It was very much in vogue. It also made its way to Osmania University because a lot of professors who taught at Osmania University had been sent to London on scholarship by the Nizam's government, where they had been exposed to this leftist thought. I mean, London and Moscow aren't too far away. So those professors, they started infusing Osmania with this with a lot of communist thought. And when the Congress strand didn't really live up to the expectations that people like Raj Bahadur Gaur set for it, and rightly so, they were more attracted towards the leftism. And one of the first groups that in Osmania that came up was the OU Comrades Association. And then eventually it went on to merge with the leftist students of other universities and colleges like City College in Hyderabad. And many of these students also ended up playing a huge role in the unionization of a lot of factories and businesses where a lot of workers were exploited, and just in the districts as well. They definitely made their presence felt in the districts too.
All right. Okay. So, but these are the various strands we've looked at. We've looked at the influence of the Razakars. We've looked at the double migration to Pakistan, Ari Samaj, student politics, all of it. What made you chronicle this book? In 10 chapters, you explore 10 people, 10 different people. Some of them are alive, some of them are no more. And the ones who are no more, you ended up speaking to either people they worked with or their children, right? But what made you write this book primarily? Why does a book like the Hyderabadis matter? What was the knowledge production you were hoping to fill?
Like I mentioned before, a lot has been written about partition. That too, not just from the statesman-centric perspective, but oral histories of people who actually suffered because of the decisions that were made, because of these decisions that were made by statesmen. And there has been a lot of good literature that chronicles the journeys of ordinary people who experienced so much upheaval. But for the most part, that's been limited to Punjabi migrants, North Indian, Bengali, Sindhi. But Hyderabad didn't figure too much. There have been some good chroniclings. However, Hyderabad only figures in this realm from a very statesman perspective, such as books like A.G. Nurani's The Destruction of Hyderabad.
So it's more about Operation Polo or police action as we know it. But that's where the buck stops, you're saying.
Yeah, and that too from the perspective of the Nizam, Sardar Patel, Qasim Razvi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and even the big communist leaders. However, the upheaval that was experienced by people here when the Indian military marched into Marathwada, Hyderabad, Karnataka, or even the districts during the Telangana rebellion, that hasn't been shed light upon, unfortunately. Not many people have gone out and done the fieldwork and interviewed people who saw and lived through that time. I was lucky enough just to catch 3 or 4 people who have first-hand experience of what transpired during that period. So I felt that these voices needed to be showcased, and not just their voices, but how the tragedy that they experienced, what effect that's having on their future generations, as events like the formation of Andhra Pradesh, the first Telangana struggle, the subsequent Telangana struggle, and in 2014, the other political trends that have played out ever since this state of Telangana has been formed.
All right. Yeah, I suppose that is the takeaway. So from the horse's mouth, that is the reason, or from the Hyderabadi's mouth, that is the reason to read this book, because in 10 chapters, Danesh does manage to capture the various oral narratives which were at play leading up to the independence of India, and then eventually what has happened since then. But if you think stories like these matter, if you think clarifying cultural accounts, cultural history is an important part of news, then please subscribe to the News Minute, and we shall continue bringing you voices like Danish and interviews like these. So thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to and pay to keep news free. Thank you.